All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Gene Bites and NGI. Today, we're going to talk about personalized nutrition and nutritional genomics and how this relates to COVID-19. I've got my team with me today. I've got Michelle Godfred and Laura Kelly, Samantha Menz, and Thomas Prather. Hope you guys are all enjoying your social distancing and the new and interesting world that we all live in. So how's everybody doing?
Hanging in.
Hanging in. Day of paradise.
Yeah. Always glad to get on Zoom with colleagues and friends and chit-chat a little bit.
Yeah.
Should we be having tequila instead?
I usually wait till 5.
5 o'clock.
Too early for that?
5 o'clock somewhere.
What time is it?
a.m. over here.
Hawaii, yeah. Is it 5 a.m.?
5 a.m. on the dot.
Oh, jeez.
5 o'clock.
That works, yeah.
Right?
They never specified AM or PM, so.
Right?
No, they did not.
Military time.
I mean, I have a Guinness glass, but it's definitely water. It could be tequila. You guys don't know. It could be fun.
You never know.
Right?
Whatever gets us through.
Right? Yeah, no, actually alcohol suppresses your immune system, everybody.
Yes, it does.
There's that.
We would be behaving, right? Because that's what we do here at NGI, is we tell you how to boost your immune system, which is why we're here, okay? So, of course, we're not here to give medical advice, of course, so there's our little disclaimer, and there's going to be one in our presentation today as well, but, we're here to educate you and help you learn about how to stay healthy and make sure that we are, doing the right things to boost our immune system and learn how, your individual body works, because I think one of the things that is kind of a little overwhelming is that before all of this happened, we were all talking about precision medicine and nutritional genomics and how everybody had their own bio-individuality. And then all of this happened, and then all of that went away. And now all of a sudden we're all talking about, well, this one protocol works for everybody, and we should be, all doing the same thing. And it's kind of like all of our collective wisdom kind of flew out the window. And I think that's pretty weird and not very wise. So we're here to kind of bring a little bit of reason back to the universe, back to science, back to nutrition and back to medicine. So for our listeners today, we're going to walk you guys through a little bit about nutritional genomics, just in case there are new listeners on, because we get new people that come and hang out with us every week. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to take a dive into the mechanisms of why, one, how the virus kind of gets involved in the body, and then 2, why you would take certain nutrients, and not really just like, oh, it's good for antivirals, but really kind of looking at, the actual mechanisms. So things like toll-like receptors, and, why, how the virus might be working with hemoglobin, and certain ways to actually thwart hypoxia and those kinds of things. So again, none of this is medical advice. This is all research-based. We want you to still work with your doctor, even if you are a patient here at NGI. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This part always takes just a little second as we kind of get the presentation started. So hang on for us just a second. We'll get this started. You guys can talk for a second if you want. It doesn't have to be dead silent over there. All right. Hi. All right. So pretty little picture. Okay, there's our medical disclaimer, of course. So make sure that you work with your doctor. And again, this is for educational purposes only. Okay. All right. So I think Sam's going to walk us through this, right? So tell us about what personalized or precision medicine is.
Yes. So one of the major things that we like to distinguish between is nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics. So all too often, these two terms are kind of used interchangeably, and it's not really correct. So when we're looking at nutrigenetics, we're looking really only at disease risk prediction, so odds ratios. So I can't tell you how many times we've had patients come to us, they have their raw data from 23andMe or MyHeritage or these other direct-to-consumer companies, and they're just panicking because they have a gene or they have a specific SNP, and they feel like they're doomed to then develop a particular illness or disease. And luckily, we work within the nutrigenomic or epigenetic realm, where we actually look at the measurable effect on the genome, and we also look at where your genetics and your environment intersect. So how do we do that? We look at your metabolomics. This is giving us some information in terms of your biochemistry, how your pathways are working. I think you know by now that we are pathway people. So it's able to kind of give us a snapshot of what's going on in your body right now so that we can then validate what is actually in your genome or your health blueprint, if you will. We also look at your lab work, of course, to get a good idea of how your body is currently functioning. And so essentially you could say that we are biohackers because we're looking at your body, we're taking out the guesswork, we're looking at your propensity to develop illnesses, but actually looking to see if those genes and those SNPs are doing anything or if they're being expressed. And we're able to take that information and give you, lifestyle, diet, supplement recommendations that will actually help your genes to be expressed optimally.
Thank you, Sam.
Of course.
Great. I think Michelle's going to talk to us next.
Yeah, so really quick, back to just some immune system basics. We have basically 3 parts to our immune system. We have what we like to call our old immune system. That's the body's first response to an antigen, but it's not going to provide you long-lasting immunity. It's things like your skin and your white blood cells. And then we need our adaptive immune system to step in. We call that our new immune system. And this is acquired after birth. So it's very specific to certain antigens and provides us our long-lasting protection. And then to help out, we have our complement system, which is what we like to call our ancient immune system. And it's a set of over 20 different proteins or complements that help the antibodies, and we can measure things like C4 and C3. So those are the 3 parts to our immune system, and we will go over pieces and parts of that in this talk.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, so the old immune system, I just want to kind of let you guys think about, these are things that kind of eat different things around the body. So things are like macrophages and neutrophils. So think about an old system that kind of gobbles up things and that it may see. So if it comes across a virus or if it comes across a bacteria, it's pretty archaic. It's just going to go, oh, you're bad, and it's gonna eat it. The adaptive immune system, this one's a kind of a fancy immune system. It's going to, recognize that it's a problem, and it's going to actually create something very specific, like an antibody, that is specific just for that virus. And so that the next time that you see that virus, your immune system goes, oh, hey, wait, we've already made something that's very specific just for that virus, and then it's going to create a whole army of antibodies that can therefore then fight off that infection. And that's how we get immunity to certain infections. And so that's why it's really important that we have this adaptive or new fancy kind of immune system. The complement system, this is it's part of the old immune system, but it is kind of a bridge between the new immune system and the old immune system. And so this one can be problematic, but the reason that we talk about it is because if you have issues in your complement system, it's kind of like a waterfall system. But if you have issues in this complement system, it can actually increase your risk for certain viruses or certain bacterial infections or certain allergies as well, certain immune dysfunction. So
Christy, you gave us an example of it kind of being like a domino system. So if one domino is missing, it can't keep flowing like a waterfall. And so we can actually look at those pieces and parts in your genetics to see where you might have a weakness and fix that, that spot. Yeah. I like that analogy.
Exactly. Yeah, it's absolutely like a domino. So the complement. So like if we have C1, C2, C3, C4, there are even actually little subset dominoes in there, like C3A, C4A. There's a whole bunch of little dominoes in there, but yeah, so we can measure those things, and depending on where your little dominoes might be missing determines what kind of autoimmune disease you might have. So it's pretty complicated when we talk about the immune system. We talk about these big massive pathways and these things. But as we kind of get into more about the immune system and how it works, just want to put a framework out there for people that are just learning about the immune system. All right, so COVID-19 basics. Who's going to talk about that? Sam?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about this in previous Gene Bites or updates on COVID. Kind of the basic symptoms, some of them are difficult to distinguish from allergies and flus and other viruses that of course are going around right now. I keep saying it's a really bad time to have allergies and anxiety. As soon as you sneeze, you start having a panic attack because you're not sure what's happening. So some of the most common symptoms are going to be a fever. The dry cough is really important, as usually with the flu or other viruses, it's more of a wet, productive cough. Body aches and fatigue, of course, loss of appetite, diarrhea, some people are vomiting, and interestingly enough, some people are showing only GI symptoms, or they're showing only GI symptoms first, and then the respiratory symptoms come a little bit later, which we'll talk about more from a genetic standpoint. Sore throat, difficulty breathing, which is why this is really scary for those who have asthma or any other kind of respiratory ailment. Runny nose, of course, congestion, which comes along with the pollen. And then loss of smell or taste. We are hearing that more and more, that people are either having that as an initial symptom, or that is kind of an onset symptom in this case. For most people, the symptoms appear within 1 to 5 days, but for some, it's up to 14 days that they've been incubating the virus. I think the longest was 24 days that we talked about. They had it for 24 days, but they did not show symptoms until that 24th day, which is a little scary in terms of spreading this. So again, you can infect people up to a month after contracting the virus, which is why this social distancing is so important. Especially with those who are at risk, immunocompromised, the elderly, things like that. Reinfection is possible. So there is more research that's needed with that, but we're tending to see more and more reports of people who have had it, recovered, and then they get it again. And then the really scary part, which I think is terrifying most people, is that this SARS-2 virus can survive on surfaces for up to 5 days, depending upon the surface. We had a nice graphic, I think it was in our last lecture, in terms of stainless steel, plastic, cardboard, things like that. So of course you can reference that to see your surfaces and what you need to kind of disinfect as you go along. It's right there, actually, my speaker that was blocking it. Yeah.
Are you guys wiping down your groceries? I know some people are being really diligent about that. I haven't been super good.
I haven't either. And the more that I see that graphic, I'm like, I really should leave the bags outside, spray them down. And yeah, I need to be better about that.
I'm washing what's inside if I can, but.
I can't believe it, because before this, I would have never used Lysol.
Right.
Same.
Like the Amazon boxes that come, they get sprayed down, and then I open them up, and then actually my dining room is filled with boxes because I'm getting ready to move. But like I have like a decontamination zone in there, and in the garage, and it's kind of weird. It's like I would have never have done that before, but it's like I open them up, I spray them down, and then I bring the stuff into the house.
Right.
And then in terms of the groceries, like the thing that got me the most, because it's like, we wear a mask and we have gloves, and, of course, somebody, you can't wear the same gloves around.
Right. Say that.
You have to change your gloves, or you have to at least sanitize your gloves,
right.
If you're going to reuse them. But, as you're feeling like avocados, it's like, oh my gosh, how many people have felt the avocados.
I know.
It's like the OCD kind of kicks in, you
Yep.
know, it's like, oh no, you know, and so yeah, things like that, and definitely bringing home and cleaning, and
Yeah.
washing, you know, like the watermelon, I wash the outside of the watermelon. Not that I didn't do that before, because you know, they get
Right.
bacteria inside, but really thinking about that kind of stuff more so now. Which begs a whole different question, you know, are we being too hygienic? You know, what about our immune systems? You know, there are people that are purposely going out and getting infected so that they can go ahead and build immunity. So there's a whole different thing. We're not going to get into that. But you know, there's a whole debate and topic about that. It depends on your immune system. It depends on whether you're immunocompromised, and you can talk to your doctor. You can ask us here at NGI if you're a patient here. You know, what's right for you, you know, and that's something that only you can do with your doctor. You know, that's something that you need to figure out. Should you, you know, be exposed? Is your immune system strong enough to handle it? And, you know, if you're immunocompromised, or if you are somebody on this page right here, then, you know, maybe you should take extra precautions. So those are things to think about. So, Sam, I think you wanted to talk about something on this page as well.
Yes. So, you know, these are all pretty obvious. You know, the elderly, they tend to be more higher at risk for any virus that goes around. We talked a little bit about, you know, those with the diabetes, if you will, the obesity, the diabetes, the high blood pressure. They're going to be at a higher risk. You know, smokers, of course, they're going to have decreased lung capacity, the risk of COPD, things like that. And obviously the immunocompromised, we've discussed that before as well, but something that we're seeing more and more is the racial disparity, and then those in the lower income brackets as well, just because they may live in a food desert where they can't find fresh, healthy foods. They may have limited access to healthcare and limited access to information. So they don't know about these things that may increase their risk for contracting this virus. I know I used to work at WIC, and I had a Hispanic woman, a client who was diagnosed with diabetes, and her doctor told her that it was a normal part of aging for her, which is just mind-blowing. It's absolutely not. So just, it's unfortunate that there is still this systemic racism and just those disparities between populations.
Yeah, I think that's something that we all need to be, you know, aware of as healthcare practitioners, as, you know, as human beings, you know, that we are, you know, aware of our circumstances. You know, there was a really beautiful, you know, post on Instagram a week or so ago, and it was, you know, for some people it's a, you know, vacation, some people it's a sprinkle, some people it's a storm, and other people it's a hurricane. I think it's really important that we all honor where we are in this process, and you know, for the people that it's a hurricane, that are experiencing a sprinkle or a sunshine, you know, a little vacation, that you know, we help those other people. So you know, if you can go to the store for, you know, elderly person in your neighborhood, or you know, if you have the ability to donate money or volunteer, please do so. For those of us who can do that. So, but just to kind of, you know, wrap up things here on this page, you know, hypertension, diabetes, asthma, liver disease, lung disease, heart disease, immunocompromised, cancer, and you know, those are the things that are really, those are the big ones. Those are the things that are you know, you should really, really be washing your groceries, really be self-isolating. The things that are less obvious: males, obesity, smokers, vapors. If you have a low white blood count, not everybody's like going around and pricking their fingers or getting blood work all the time. These are some of the more epigenetic or sleeper conditions. You know, most men are out there thinking, hey, I'm Superman, you know, I can do anything, you know, it's a typical male mentality. Since Thomas has left us for some reason, I guess he lost his internet connection. We could talk badly about him, Thomas, we still love you, but you know, most men are out there thinking that they're rock stars, that they can handle all of this. So and guys, we love you, but you know, that's why women are here to take care of you. So it's a thing. But you know, these are things, guys. And you know, we need to be aware of this, and as scientists and researchers and doctors, we are here to figure out why. So let's, you know, we're gonna absolutely talk about that. One of the things that I want to really kind of impress upon you guys and listeners that are here today, there are distinct stages in terms of treatment modalities and in terms of health, okay? When we're dealing not only with COVID-19, but also with other viral conditions and quite frankly, any condition. But because we're talking about COVID-19, because what else can we talk about, right? I mean, that's what's happening on the planet. We're gonna hone in on this. But you know, we're gonna have 4 stages that we're gonna talk about. Number 1 is basically prevention, okay? This is an asymptomatic stage or an incubation period, but really we're talking about prevention, all right? So this is where we want to talk about your adaptive immune system. We want to talk about your innate immune system. We're going to talk about balancing how your body functions, okay? So this is the prime time. So if you're sitting at home right now and watching YouTube and going, man, I'm really worried about this, and I want to make sure that my immune system can seriously kick some butt if it encounters this virus, this is where we are in the sweet spot, okay? So you want to think about things like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, magnesium, maybe even some little antiviral herbals. I happen to like Umgar V-Clear. That's not an endorsement, but those are things that I really like that have been shown, that have robust research, okay? We're again going to talk about some of the mechanisms for those today. Most of these are clear and safe for the general population, guys. 95% of the population do very, very well with these, genetically, epigenetically, across the board, okay? Vitamin A, be careful if you're pregnant. You still want to talk to your doctor about these things. Don't go run out and take high dosages of anything ever, okay? That's a bad idea. Please talk to either a certified nutrition specialist, a registered dietitian, a doctor. Talk to somebody who knows what they're doing. Please don't self-prescribe anything. But these are things that can be very, very helpful, okay, in terms of modulating your immune system. That's stage 1, okay? That's really good advice for anybody all the time, okay? Figure out how your body works. Figure out what you can do to make your immune system ready for any invader that happens to come along, okay? That's stage 1. Now, let's say stage 2 comes along, you're exposed to coronavirus, okay? You start to get sick, you might have some mild symptoms, we're not feeling too bad, we're obviously not feeling great, but let's just say that you were taking some upregulators that you found on Dr. Google somewhere, some medicinal mushrooms, some echinacea, some things like that. And let's just say you haven't looked at your genetics yet, but maybe you've got autoimmune disease. Maybe you have, I don't know, rheumatoid arthritis or MS or, I don't know, some ulcerative colitis or something like that. You know, this would be the time when maybe upregulating your immune system might not be a good idea. Okay, because what ends up happening with COVID-19 is that, or at least what we think might be happening, is that we might be progressing to a cytokine storm, which basically means that your immune system gets overstimulated and ends up attacking your own body. Okay, so just like an autoimmune disease, it gets overexcited. So this would be a time where we would want to kind of pull back on some of that stuff and not take a bunch of immune stimulating things, all right? So this is phase 2. There is some evidence that there are things like resveratrol and turmeric might actually be helpful in this phase, but I want to emphasize that these should not be taken on your own. You need to be working with somebody who knows what they're doing and hopefully also be looking at your genetics because they matter. They matter a lot. Some people taking resveratrol can be very bad for them. Some people taking turmeric can be very bad for them. It can, you know, actually upregulate certain pathways that can cause more inflammation. Sometimes it can change your estrogen levels. It can do all kinds of things. So, you know, these are not harmless products. They work everywhere in the body. You know, what do I always say, ladies?
Nothing
Nothing
in
works in
isolation.
Hey, good. Nothing works in isolation.
We're going to have
Right.
to practice that.
Nothing works in isolation. Right? My soapbox. So, this is something that's super, super important. So unless you're working with a practitioner that really understands that, the turmeric is going to work in, 250 places in the body, and has looked at all 250 places in your body and understands how that's going to work, then I'd be careful about that. Especially in this circumstance where we're dealing with a novel virus that we're not 100% sure what the complete mechanism is on these things. So a degree of caution is good, especially in this early stage of disease. Now, in stage 3, this is basically where we progress to where you might be needing to be in a hospital, okay? So hopefully we never get to this stage, okay? But there's a small percentage of people that actually get to this particular stage. Most of the time we are looking at people who are elderly, 65 or older. A lot of times we're getting into that acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS. At this point, we're really trying to get inflammation down, okay? We're going to talk about 2 different mechanisms today. One has to do with ACE2 receptors and the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, which is a pretty complicated system, but we're going to talk about lung fibrosis coming from that system. We're also going to talk about a hemoglobin system, or how the virus might actually be acting more like a parasite, and how that causes hypoxia. So we're going to talk about those 2 different systems and how we would treat those two completely differently, actually. But 2 different things that are currently under investigation are actually IV vitamin C and IV ozone. And those are actually in stark contrast to using ventilators. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy and blood transfusions are also being considered. Clearly there are lots of different medications and treatments that we can use as well, but really we would want to start those most of the time in stage 2, okay? Again, not trying to give medical advice here, so we're not talking a lot about giving certain medications at this point. If you guys have questions, please do ask us, and you guys will likely be able to deduce what we would recommend, but we're trying to be a little bit careful about saying some of those things. Now, stage 4, recovery. We may have had lung and heart damage from some of these things. Now, one study actually showed that nicotinamide riboside, a form of vitamin B3, was really, really helpful in preventing lung damage. So again, don't run out and start taking high doses of niacin. Niacin, especially for ladies, controls the conversion of estrone to estradiol. So if you have a risk of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, those kinds of things, this might not be such a good idea. It might cause estrogen dominance, might increase your risk for breast cancer. But, if we're looking at, preventing lung fibrosis, and maybe we're in stage 2 or 3, this might be something that could be helpful. But again, this is something that you need to work with your doctor, or if you're working here at NGI, then we can talk about those things. There are other ways. So the NRF2 pathway, again, this is a monster pathway, but upregulating that particular pathway has also been shown to help with pulmonary fibrosis as well. So I guess the point here, guys, is that there are distinct stages of disease. The treatment of the disease and the preventative stages, or I guess the actions for each of those stages, are completely different. And so there's not one thing that you're going to do throughout that is the right answer. So making sure that you are, 1, paying attention to where you are in the stage, 2, understanding what your genetics are in terms of your predispositions, and 3, looking at your real-time laboratory data. Okay, so just like any other precision medicine approach, you have to be looking at all of that information at real time. Okay, so that is what we really want to impress upon you guys, is that this is a live, breathing event. It's not something where we go, okay, here's the study that was published 2 weeks ago, this is solid evidence, and go. Okay, this is breathing, fluid, dynamic, just like you, because you're a breathing, fluid, dynamic human being. You're not a lab rat that's static in a room somewhere.
They've talked about that, how people present very differently, which is always going back to, well, depends what's going on with your body. I mean, the way your body and those, genes work and the pathways work and all of those kinds of things are going to make this, work differently for you. So I think that's, they're seeing that very clearly, which is makes it confusing too, obviously, how to treat it. But
I think it makes clear the point that this type of medicine, the type of medicine and nutritional genomics that we practice is not part of everyday care.
Mm-hmm.
It drives home the point of, like what we're trying to do at Omics is not yet in real time. So, we're trying to put this type of care into everyday care. And we just don't, we have the technology to do so, but the skill set is not there yet among most primary physicians, and
Mm-hmm.
hardly any. So this is it's a new way of thinking. It's a new way of putting pieces together. And so, that's why, we're all here to try and get this kind of information out. And we give it away for free on YouTube here today and every day. All right, so let's talk about the viral mechanisms and some salient SNPs. So Laura, I'm going to let you talk about ACE since you've become our de facto expert on ACE. So I'm going to let you go ahead and start on that for a little bit.
All right. And I've gone over this a little bit in a Gene Bite, so we can always refer back to that. So I won't go into it in too much detail. But basically what we're talking about here is the RAS system, so the renin-angiotensin system. And there are a couple different genes in that system that we're really looking at because that's what the virus targets. It sort of takes advantage of the different types of genetic dispositions that we can have. So often what we see is that, the symptoms that we get are sort of indicators of the type of gene expression that we have. So ACE receptors are actually found in the lungs and the gastrointestinal system. So this is often why we're talking about those two systems and where there are symptoms. So the ACE deletion, if you actually have that, a lot of times you will end up having more of the gastrointestinal type symptoms like diarrhea. And often that does mean that you might actually have worse symptoms in general. So the ACE deletion, what it does is it actually increases the amount of angiotensin II in the body. And so this upregulates aldosterone, which is one of our stress hormones. And this can actually lead to things like anxiety and learning and memory problems, autoimmunity, stress, hypertension, those kinds of things. And so what's really interesting too is that connection between, ACE or the ACE gene, angiotensin, autoimmunity, and then of course the cytokine storm that we end up seeing as well. So sort of beginning to connect the path between having some of these things and then actually seeing them sort of in action and how they create that kind of presentation when you do have COVID-19, when you actually have those symptoms. This also increases blood pressure. It increases the potential for potassium wasting. So some of the other things that we've seen where we're looking at fluid balance and some of the other presentations people are having. So specific to this virus, so the SARS-CoV-2 virus, is not just the ACE deletion, but it's also ACE2. So it's sort of the secondary, and we'll look at the pathway in a second, but it's the next gene sort of well, it's actually downstream and upstream. So we'll kind of look at that when we look at the next slide. But basically what the virus does is it takes advantage of ACE2 and sort of wiggles between ACE2 and its receptor to kind of get into the body and into the cell so that it can replicate. And so what helps ACE2, I'm kind of like jumping ahead here, aren't I?
Okay, I can go forward.
Not really going in order.
Yeah.
So what helps ACE2 actually is another gene that sits next to it. It sort of upregulates that entrance into the cells. So ACE2, you'll see there is sitting between angiotensin, or yeah, this is a good one for me. So angiotensin 1, you'll see that there's ACE gene. She's going to circle it there for me. And then you'll see angiotensin 2. And then next to it, you'll see ACE2. So this is basically how the body is moving these different things around and getting them to the cell. And so when you have an increase in angiotensin 2, your body is going to have to convert that into the other regulatory chemicals that they're going to either increase your blood pressure or decrease. So angiotensin 2 tends to increase blood pressure, increase aldosterone, increase that kind of compression and inflammatory response. And then angiotensin 1-7 and angiotensin 1-9, as your body's converting it over to that, it's going to create lower blood pressure. It's going to vasodilate. It's going to reduce the inflammation. So how does the virus impact this whole system? So the way that I kind of like to visualize this is that ACE is sort of like ACE and the receptor are kind of like a married couple. And so if ACE2 has, kind of let himself go, he gets a little bit sort of squishy. So this is if you have, some variations in your ACE2 gene, you kind of have this like, squishy gene that really hasn't, taken care of himself. And so he's married to, the AT1 receptor there. You'll see them next to each other. And so ACE2 basically goes out and does his job. And sometimes when he comes home, he really just doesn't connect with his AT1 receptor, right? He likes to sit in front of the TV. So he's getting squishy and not taking care of himself. Right, exactly. And so if that happens and they don't have this really nice, strong connection, right, if he's off having his margarita, he's not going to connect nicely with that receptor. And so you can see there, what's going to happen is that little virus is going to wiggle in between them. Okay. And so as that happens, the virus gets in, and then he can kind of pop right into the cell. And so, basically the connection is just not between, the receptor and ACE2. And then there's another little gene next to him, and, maybe it's his best friend there who's not being very helpful, but TRMPSS2 actually helps this whole process along too. So depending on what's going on with your gene there, it either is going to help the virus come in or not be as helpful. So again, this is always going back to what your genes are doing. But really the take home piece here is that if you have some alterations in your ACE2 gene, it's going to change how the connection between the ACE2 and the AT1 receptor are, and it basically allows the virus to sneak into your body, increasing your viral load. And so that's kind of the take home piece of all of this. And of course, I go into, more of the presentation with, how the other chemicals are increasing blood pressure and all of those kinds of things, where that's why people who have higher blood pressure or have more of this vascular inflammatory process, are going to have more trouble with this because of this whole system gets dysregulated. So kind of a long, complicated answer. Was trying to simplify. Don't know if I did that very well, but was able to kind of talk about that connection, which is really what's most important here when we're really looking at how the mechanism of how the virus gets in the body.
I see a lot of people confused on ACE inhibitors and ARBs. And so Could you guys explain why there's that discrepancy?
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and try that. And then Chrissy, you can tell me because we were kind of talking about this before. So ACE1 there, you'll sort of see if you circle it on the other one, because it actually shows that when you have an ACE1 inhibitor, what can actually happen is it upregulates angiotensin 1. So then you're actually increasing, the ACE2 receptor or genes, I guess, just how much ACE2 is in the body, right? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. And then it's actually going to do more of what we think is going to happen is it's going to go to angiotensin 1-9 and then, connect to the ACE2 receptor, the AT2 receptor. I'm really having trouble today. AT2 receptor, not do what we kind of thought, which was create more AT1 receptors. So yeah, go ahead. You explain. I'm struggling today.
Okay, no, you did a great job. So basically, the ACE1 or ACE inhibitors, they like lisinopril, for instance. So that basically, when it blocks this this site here, so if you have an ACE deletion, it upregulates angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Okay, so that essentially is going to cause you to have, well, essential hypertension. And what is not on here, which is on some of the other ones, is that it causes an increase in aldosterone. So it looks like I'm delayed. Is everything okay? Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, it's back.
Yeah, you're
It's
fine.
back.
All right, good. You know, when that happens, so the ACE inhibitor, essentially, if you've got this deletion here, again, because nothing acts in isolation, we have ACE2 receptors that are actually here and here and here and here and here. So when you block this and you actually increase angiotensin 1, which theoretically is a good thing when we're dealing with just blood pressure, and we cause more ACE2 receptor binding activity, that actually causes more angiotensin 1-9 and 1-7, which increases MOS and AT2, which is fantastic normally because this is antifibrotic, it lowers blood pressure, all of the mechanisms that we're going after. But when we cause more ACE2 receptor activity, that actually means that there's more of these in the cell membranes. So if we actually give more of these in the cell membranes, then that actually means there's more entry points for the virus to come into. So that's what all the fuss was about when people have said, oh, no, this is bad. You should stop taking your ACE inhibitors, okay? Because people started to freak out and go, oh my gosh, this is really bad. People are gonna die if they start, if they continue to take their lisinopril. But this, in fact, as we've looked at this mechanism, is actually really bad advice, okay? Because if we actually continue to take an ACE inhibitor, we'll actually decrease angiotensin 2 levels, which of course blocks the classical or conical pathway down here. So if we actually flip back over here, so if we actually block angiotensin 2 and stop this pathway down here to AT4 and AT1, you'll see profibrotic. Okay, so that's fibrosis of the lungs. Okay, so we absolutely want to block angiotensin 2. But then if we come back over here and we see we can actually block the separation, okay? So if our ACE2 guy's been drinking too much beer or tequila and hanging out with this buddy over here, TMPRSS2, and he needs to spend more quality time with his wife, AT1, then all we have to do is give him an ARB, okay? So that's something like Cozar, all right? So realistically, for people that have cardiovascular disease, the best thing that we could do in terms of a pharmaceutical intervention would be to give them both an ARB and an ACE inhibitor, okay? So that is actually the best thing that we can do, is actually put them on both medications. Now, what enzyme do both of those go through? What CYP enzyme? Michelle?
I don't remember.
Oh, come on. It's CYP3A4, right?
Oh, it is? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So again, looking at pharmaceuticals and, looking at pharmacogenomics, okay? So of course we want to make sure that we're controlling for that. But even so, even if you had genetic impairment in that, in this case, it would probably still be worth it, okay? So if you were having massive blood pressure dysregulation and your blood pressure went through the roof, okay, and you were having lots and lots of trouble here, and we were assuming that this mechanism was the cause, then this would actually decrease the ability of the virus to enter the cell, okay? So lisinopril and Cozar would actually decrease the ability of the virus to enter the cell in the lungs and in the gut. Food for thought.
Is there anything else that keeps the receptor on ACE2 that's a natural?
Not that I know of, but
I
that
don't
is
either.
a really good thought, to look at natural ARBs, to see if there's anything else that causes the binding receptor site between AT1 and ACE2. Now, TMPRSS2, there are antiretrovirals that target this particular enzyme, and this has a very close relationship, an affinity relationship. So, you know, that is why we do target some of the drugs. There are drug trials looking at some of those as well to help. So that's why we look at this neighboring protein over here. So food for thought. Food for thought. Okay, so this is one of the original pathways. I still think that using an ACE inhibitor and an ARB are pretty good ideas. Okay, so I still haven't seen anything to the contrary in terms of mechanism, in terms of that. Now, keep in mind, if you have alterations in these genes, then you will have a greater likelihood of having viral entry. So again, this is more evidence to suggest that if you have alterations here, then you would be more inclined to potentially want to intervene and take these medications.
It also would suggest too that you want to take an antiviral earlier on too. And I think we talk about that later, but that really if you're having an increase in viral load because you have this situation happening, in theory, you'd want to take it on the early end, an antiviral or a antiparasitic, whichever one we're using.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because if you have less virus trying to enter the cell, less virus trying to damage the ACE2 and AT1, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's clearly less viral load is always a good thing. And there are multiple ways that, can do that. So whether it's a azithromycin, whether, a Z-Pak, whether it's ivermectin, whether it's Plaquenil, whether it's zinc, whether it's vitamin A, which we're about to talk to, whatever it happens to be, that decreases viral load, these are the things that are super important. So especially if you have genetic impairment, then, more precaution, more phase 1 type things need to be implemented. So, that I think is what the big broader message is here is knowing what your risk analysis is. So, I mean, if you have the ability to kind of stroll in and your genes look amazing and you're a rock star, then, hey, go out and, work on your immunity. Maybe you're that person that, if you so desire, go ahead and build up your immune system by catching the virus. But, if you have some of these impairments, then other precautions need to be addressed. All right, so let's talk about why certain nutrients are so important. So everybody's heard, hey, you should take vitamin A. Hey, you should take vitamin D. Vitamin C is the best thing since sliced bread, right? Everybody's heard all this stuff. Even national news media is starting to talk about some of these things. Certainly all of our national healthcare providers are talking about a lot of these things. So one of the things I want to talk about is why. Okay, so I mean, just because the herbalism person from the 1800s have been talking about this doesn't necessarily mean that we understand it. So I want to make sure that our listeners and maybe our practitioner listeners also really get a good grasp on this. So let's talk about it. You guys heard of, well, I know you guys have probably heard it, but, for our listeners, there are these things called toll-like receptors, okay? And toll-like receptors are these little things in the body, and they basically are sensors. They travel around the body and they go, ooh, there's viral RNA or DNA, okay? And they transport around the body in these little bubbles, okay? So they're part of our innate immune system. So, you imagine these little sentinels kind of in the body, they're around, they go, they're there. And if they sense the viral RNA and DNA, then they're ready to attack, okay? So this particular toll-like receptor is toll-like receptor 1. It's found in macrophages and neutrophils. And so this toll-like receptor 1 is found in the large and small intestine. So pretty important, especially when we're starting to think about the fact that a lot of people are having gut issues. You know, a lot of people are out there talking about how this battle is really fought in the gut. And if you've learned anything about the immune system, you'll hear a lot of people say that the majority of the immune system resides in your belly, and it does. So this is really, really important when we talk about certain genes, like just like we were talking about the ACE2 receptor gene, it has another gene or another protein that it interacts with. Almost all things in the immune system, they have buddies, okay? And so that gets really complicated when you're trying to figure out, you know, how to target things or how they work, because the immune system is uber complicated. When we map out these pathways again, there are hundreds of different proteins and hundreds of different cytokines or chemicals that they all interact with. But oftentimes, if you could at least get the two buddies, you know, either the husband and the wife or your boyfriend and girlfriend or the sisters or however you want to think about it, if you can get at least two together, then you've got a pretty good mechanism. But this toll-like receptor 1 has something called MyD88, and these two are buddies. And when they interact together, of course, they're SNPs for those. We can look at those. But when they are combined, they're going to control things like interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, NF-kappa beta. These are all pro-inflammatory chemicals or cytokines in the body, okay? And these all have to do with that inflammatory cytokine storm, okay? That craziness that happens in the body when we go into sepsis or when we have, you know, close to death. Now, this complex, it doesn't work unless there's enough retinoic acid, okay? That's basically vitamin A. So whether or not you have SNPs or not, if you are vitamin A deficient, that essentially causes a functional SNP, okay? So we talk about this all the time in the nutritional genomics world. You don't have to have a genetic impairment, but if you have a vitamin deficiency or a cofactor deficiency, it basically makes your gene act like it's broken, okay? So if you're vitamin A deficient, you're basically going to make your body act like your little sentinels that's supposed to go around and tell your body whether or not you have a virus. It's going to act like it's broken. That's a problem, a big one, okay? So you want your virus detecting molecules, your virus detecting army to work really, really well, especially when there might be a deadly virus going around the planet. Yes? Yes.
Let's talk really quick about the different forms of vitamin A, because if you flip over your multivitamin bottle, usually it's going to be beta carotene, and beta carotene is what we find in food, but a lot of people don't convert beta carotene to the active form in the body. It's a gene that we look at, and so can we take something different, Chrissy?
So you actually should be taking retinols, so preformed vitamin A. But be careful out there with like the fish quality stuff that can be a little sketchy. You really want to take like a preformed retinol. You know, this is something, if you're looking at BCMO1, it was actually renamed BCO1 in like 2017. This is actually a good segue into our next topic. That gene actually requires iron, okay? So if you happen to like baby carrots, or if you happen to like sweet potatoes and you eat a lot of them and your little hands or feet have turned orange, or maybe you look like our president every once in a while, you get a nice little orange tint to your face. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. But if that ever happens to you, that's called carotenodermia. That means that you're iron deficient. Okay, so that means that you are not converting beta carotene into the active form of vitamin A. That's a problem. Okay, this actually requires vitamin A. Pregnant ladies, be very careful. You know, this is why you can't take Accutane, those kinds of things with, you know, with pregnancy. This can be a problem. Other little thing here, vitamin A, vitamin D, they are besties, okay? You have to have a good ratio of vitamin A and vitamin D together because they actually activate their gene receptor sites. So again, not getting too complicated here, but vitamin A, you must have the right ratio of vitamin A to vitamin D. That is based on your gene. So it's not like a total normal thing for everybody, but usually it's a 2-to-1 ratio, okay? So like, you know, 8,000 IU of vitamin A to 4,000 IU of vitamin D, okay? So that's typically something that we're looking for. Again, don't quote me on that for everybody. Some people are different. Other people overconvert vitamin D. There's all kinds of things that go into that, but you really do need to have, you know, a good balance of your fat soluble vitamins. So very, very important here. But for a lot of people, especially when it comes to things like this, you need to make sure they have vitamin A and not beta carotene. I think the gene prevalence on BCMO1, you have to have 3 of the genes to actually make it so that you are impaired there. But I think it's upwards of like 60% of the population our Caucasian population does not convert beta carotene to retinol. So a large population does not convert beta carotene all that well. Quite a bit. All right, so vitamin C, why is it so important, right? So everybody's rushing out and getting vitamin C. Is it even available on Emerson and FullScript?
It's back.
It's back.
Mm-hmm.
Good. All right. So there's some really interesting research that's come out. You know, we've been using Plaquenil. We've been hearing about ivermectin. These are anti-malarials, anti-parasitics. You guys read this research?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so what they're saying is that they're postulating that COVID-19 actually dissociates iron 3 to iron 2, okay? Now, you guys know that I'm a huge fan of the Fenton reaction. When I teach biochemistry to my nutritional genomics students, the first thing that we do is we learn about the Fenton reaction. So this is basically how ascorbate or vitamin C is going to scavenge the extra free radical that comes. So when iron 3 changes to iron 2, it's getting rid of an electron. That's where the 3 turns to 2. So a free electron is also known as a free radical. Okay, so yeah, free radicals we've heard of. Those are good.
No.
No.
It sounds like they should be.
They should. Free radicals for
So
everybody,
radical,
right?
free. Yeah, you're radical and free.
Right? Frees are good. It's
Opposite.
radical, man. Yeah, so cool. Not. Yeah, I mean, that could be fun. So free radicals are bad, and vitamin C is supposed to come in and save the day. It's supposed to be amazing and fix all of this. And so this is why we are using high-dose vitamin C or IV vitamin C. A little bit more technicality here for maybe our clinicians that are listening. This free radical is attacking the porphyrin in hemoglobin. Okay, so this is actually what's causing the excessive oxidative stress. It's actually occurring in that epithelial lining of our lungs, and it's resulting in hypoxia. The crazy thing is that a lot of people are getting like the sickness, like the cold, and then recovering from the cold, and then like a week later getting the hypoxia, which is absolute bananas. So, you know, if you're finding that you have like your pulse ox, if you have a little pulse oximeter, if you drop below 95, that's really when people are starting to get really sick, okay? So something called EPO is stimulated at that point. The hemoglobin, it's kind of like when you have nitric oxide, carbon monoxide poisoning. Mm-hmm. It strips the hemoglobin's availability to carry oxygen. Okay, so hemoglobin is shaped like a little ring here. It carries the iron in the middle. If you can't carry that and you can't switch that out and carry the oxygen in it anymore, then all of a sudden it's running around the body with this free radical. The free radical is lonely. It wants to grab a friend, right? It can't be all by itself. So it grabs onto your lung epithelial lining. It grabs on there and it goes, oh, I'm going to borrow that, and it's going to destroy it. Okay, so it rips that apart, and then you're stuck with having all of this extra damaged lung tissue that then you're going to cough out, which is delicious, right? But this is what's causing all of that ground glass imaging that's bilateral on both of your lungs, because most of the time you only get pneumonia in one lung, not both. Just saying, it's a thing. So there are these proteins that are in the virus specifically. I've listed them here for anybody who wants to research this stuff. But there are actually certain glycoproteins, which are just different kind of sugar proteins that are binding to the hemoglobin that are actually attacking it. So get this vision in your head that the virus has proteins that are literally attacking the hemoglobin. It's stripping its ability to carry oxygen. So you have all of this defective blood basically floating around your body. And Plaquenil and even things like ivermectin actually inhibit the way that those mean proteins on the virus can attack your hemoglobin. So that's actually why it works, okay? So they're not really sure exactly why Plaquenil does this. And keep in mind that Plaquenil actually may be bad for certain people, specifically African Americans and certain people of Mediterranean descent. They may have a genetic issue called G6PD. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But there are other options. So Favipamir, it specifically targets one of these proteins and may actually be a better option. There is a drug trial for Favipamir. So kind of getting back to vitamin C, all of that oxidative stress that occurs when that free radical is attacking your lining of your lungs and your gut, quite frankly, that's one of the reasons we're having massive diarrhea. Again, where do we sign up for that? The vitamin C has an extra electron. So the extra electron goes, oh, hi, extra electron in iron. I'll bind with you and we'll get rid of some of that inflammatory response. This is also why IV ozone is working so well, okay? So one of the things that we can do is, again, do blood transfusions, okay? Get rid of the extra bad blood, get rid of the blood that's not functioning very well. Hyperbaric oxygen treatments are also helping. They're finding that the ventilators aren't working. It's not a problem with the alveoli. It's not a problem with the actual lung sacs. This is an inflammatory response. So this brings into question, are we still experiencing the cytokine storm? Okay, the answer is probably yes if we actually get to the point where we're septic. Okay, so your body is still going to experience that.
I was thinking that it's probably likely that there's both going on. Yeah, that the ARDs actually is happening, but there's a more complicated, issue obviously going on as well.
Exactly. So I think the issue with ACE, and I still think things like lisinopril and Cozar, Plaquenil, things like Z-Pak. I think all of those things decrease the viral load, decrease the ability of the virus to enter the cell. And then if we get to the point where we have massive inflammation and oxidative stress, that's when we go after IV vitamin C and IV ozone and hyperbaric oxygen treatment. And if need be, then we do blood transfusions. So, I mean, I'm not a, attending physician. I don't work at a hospital, but, if this was my look at, this is clearly my look at the mechanism, but if it were my patient, my loved one in a hospital, that is likely what I would do. So there are a couple of things. We get a lot of questions about hyperoxaluria and vitamin C. So, this is one of those things where typically, if you're in stage 1, the answer would still be, let's make sure that we're not dosing high doses of vitamin C. But if we're medically indicated, okay, so if we're at the point where we are in the hospital, we're going to do high doses of vitamin C, okay? So this is something where the benefit outweighs the risk factor. Even if you're in stage 2, where you're starting to feel bad, we would still, in the short term, likely dose vitamin C here to be able to offset some of the inflammatory response. We clearly would make sure that we were also binding some of the oxalate that came from that. So something like magnesium citrate would be a really good idea. Keep in mind, magnesium citrate does loosen bowels, increase stool frequency. So patients may get, concerned about that. Oh my gosh, am I having more symptoms? Make sure that you're communicating that very well. The last thing here is that ascorbic acid may also inhibit the NLPR3 inflammasomes. So it can decrease the interleukin-1 beta secretion, which is an important inflammatory chemical in the body. We're going to talk a little bit about NLPR3. Michelle is going to talk to us a little bit that in a few minutes. So that's really important, why we use a couple of other substances as well. So let's go ahead and move on. I do want to touch very quickly on zinc. Zinc is super, super important. And when the immune system gets sick, when you get an infection, it causes NF-kappa beta activation. So this gets, really, this is an inflammatory chemical in the body. So you have a zinc transporter. It rapidly takes zinc and puts it into the cells if there's not too much inflammation already occurring, okay? So if you get sick really, really fast and there's a lot of inflammation, or you're already highly inflamed, so let's just say you have diabetes and insulin resistance and cardiovascular disease and your IL-6 is already really, really high, then your zinc transporter is not going to work. Okay, so this would be bad, okay? There's a protein called IKKB for our researchers here, if you want to look up this mechanism a little bit more. But the key here, guys, is that you cannot be zinc deficient before you get infected, okay? This is so very, very important. So my stage 1 people out there that are looking to make sure that they don't get sick, please start taking your zinc now, okay? This is very, very important. Things like red meat and poultry, those are our primary sources. You can also get it from beans and nuts and a couple of, dairy products, those kinds of things. But mostly you're going to get this from animal meat. There are a couple other genes, of course, to consider if you're practicing nutritional genomics, like BHMT, RAD50, STAT4, and of course IL-6. Do you guys have any comments on zinc?
Would you have a type that you like the most?
Yeah.
So I typically recommend zinc carnosine just because it's easier on the belly. Zinc gluconate works best in the throat. So if you can find lozenges, zinc gluconate lozenges show the most antiviral activity. If you cannot, I typically am having people open up their capsules, gargle them, and then swallow. This is best to do on a full stomach because zinc sometimes can be pretty irritating to the gut. But the majority of studies show that zinc is so antibacterial, antiviral that it kills on contact. That's a pretty effective way to take care of things. I mean, of course, the virus, you're going to breathe it in. So especially if you've just recently had an exposure, like when you come back from the grocery store, when if you've been around someone who's sick, it's a really good idea to, pop a lozenge or to take your zinc at that point. So that would be my advice there. All right,
do you have an opinion about copper in addition to the zinc, or?
So copper actually it inhibits zinc. So you typically have a copper and zinc balance, where you would have, more zinc than copper. But the ACE2 gene is a zinc finger. So that means that you need zinc to actually activate the ACE2 gene, which of course we want to make sure that we're controlling that at this point. So we really don't want to be dosing with so much copper at this moment. Normally, yes, you would want to balance that. But in this circumstance, if we're actually trying to direct and modulate genetic expression, I would say to step back off of the copper at this point. Copper usually is going to compete with zinc. So if you're already zinc deficient, you would not want to dose copper because it will compete for absorption.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, cool.
So this NLRP3 protein is part of something in the immune system that's called an inflammasome. And it is important, and it's actually one of the first responses to invasion of microorganisms, being viral or bacterial. But when it gets overactivated, this is where we see the cytokine storm happen. So I won't talk too much about it, but one of the things we're seeing a lot in social media is to take high doses of melatonin. And the reason people are saying this is because it does block the action of NLRP3. So I don't know about super high doses. I take 1 milligram a night. Are you guys taking any? Are you taking higher doses?
I always take it, so.
Yeah, I always take it too, but I mean, some people are taking like 5 to 50 milligrams a night, which we normally see in cancer patients. It's actually an antioxidant as well as a hormone. So I don't know, there's different
different opinions on that. But other things that can block this protein are things like licorice, quercetin, vitamin C, also nitric oxide. We don't have that on here. So it's one of those things that's good when it first starts working, but when it gets over, when the inflammasome works too well, that's when we start having problems.
Yeah, I think generally, you know, 0.3 milligrams is typically what, you know, a maintenance dose is. 3 milligrams is typically what I'm recommending for people right now. You know, as a, you know, and the early research basically said that, you know, for people, you know, people over 40 would be the target demographic for people to take melatonin. And the reason that is because, you know, up until about age 40, you produce enough melatonin. And then after age 40, it starts to steadily decline. And then after 80, you basically aren't producing any melatonin at all. And so that's what they were originally postulating was the dramatic increased cause of death was that this NLRP3 inflammasome was incredibly activated at that age and at that stage, and that taking melatonin would help offset that and therefore decrease the death rate. And so, you know, that would be a game changer, especially for the elderly.
Yeah, and why children aren't getting it as much because they have higher levels of melatonin. I don't know if that still stands or not, but that was what they originally were saying in the research.
Yeah, that was the original thought. So I haven't seen any follow-up studies on that, but the mechanism does seem to hold true. And so, you know, we talk about things like skullcap and vitamin C. Licorice makes me a little bit nervous unless it's DGL, or the deglycerated variant of this, because licorice would actually work on the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, so increasing cortisol, increasing sympathetic, activation, those kinds of things. So I actually would not recommend licorice unless you were really tightly controlled in terms of the RAS system and didn't have any genetic variation, no ACE deletion, no blood pressure regulation, any dysregulation, any of those kinds of things. You know, I would be very, very cautious about using licorice. So, you know, that would be something I would be very, very, would use very gingerly. So I do want to touch a little bit on quercetin. It's very buzzing about right now. It's found in lots of fruits and vegetables. We typically use it as an antihistamine. A lot of people use it as an antihistamine. It does help to regulate cholesterol. So through a gene called PCSK9, this does interact with the LDL receptor. So we use this on our CardioDX panel. So this pathogenic SNPs typically result in familial hypercholesterolemia. So we have PCSK9, I'm not going to say that right, PCSK9 inhibitors. So those are drugs that we use for high cholesterol. So, you know, the weird thing, this is one of those genes. So a lot of these, just like the ACE gene, the minor allele is actually protective. So, you know, we have some, you know, one of those things, again, that we teach is that sometimes the SNP is good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it doesn't mean anything at all. This is one of those times where having a SNP is actually kind of a good thing, especially in this case. So sometimes some of the SNPs here can actually provide a lower LDL and reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. Again, not the pathogenic ones, but some of the other SNPs. And consequently, some SNPs also result in less susceptibility to malaria. So, you know, we were looking at the fact that medications that block the function of this particular SNP decrease cholesterol and also reduce the risk of malaria and therefore COVID-19. So quercetin happens to be a natural inhibitor of this enzyme, as well as being antiviral and antiparasitic. And because of this mechanism, it actually blocks viral entry through what we were talking about earlier. So it actually works in the whole iron, vitamin C mechanism. So, you know, this is something, again, that, you know, is a natural ingredient. This isn't a medication. You know, there are things, of course, that, you know, citrus bioflavonoids is typically where this comes from. Some people may not tolerate it. There is a derivative form, it's called quercetin dihydrate, that is far more tolerable for people that may have histamine intolerance or mast cell activation disorder. So that is something to consider. It is, again, we're having supply chain issues in the US on some of these things. But, you know, it is still something that may be very, very helpful, again, in stage 1 or stage 2. Again, if you get to stage 3, then that does clearly require medical intervention. You should not be treating that on your own. I think, Sam, did you want to talk about that, or do you want me to talk about G6PD?
I think you're probably
Okay.
better off talking about that one.
All right, so G6PD. So this is this basically can cause a spontaneous destruction of your red blood cells, or what's called hemolysis. So this is the gene that we've been talking about in terms of our African American population and our Mediterranean descent folks. So, you know, if you have an alteration of this, you should be testing for this, okay? So you can look at it through LabCorp. We can obviously look at it through your genetics. People that have this alteration have a higher susceptibility of getting viral infections because their immune system is decreased, and they also are going to likely have an adverse response to things like Plaquenil. Okay, so this is pretty dangerous when we think about using these anti-malarial drugs, sort of either in clinical trials or just sort of ad hoc. Okay, so this is something that should be tested, especially in these populations, before giving these types of drugs, even if they have COVID-19, okay? So this is when other medications should be used, because it will absolutely result in hemolysis, okay? So that's basically where the blood cells just get cut in half. Hemolysis, blood cut, blood death. This is bad, okay? So this will absolutely be destructive and devastating. So, you know, this is not good. It's found, again, at about 10% in those populations. So we really need to be using precision medicine when we are looking, again, at our medications and our treatment approaches. So very, very important. All right, and last but not least, guys, of course, we have our Immune DX panel. So we are looking at, I think we have, you know, 200 and some odd genes on this panel. We are looking at every aspect of immune function. So we're looking at genes that are associated with SARS-1, SARS-2. We're looking at genes associated with the cytokine storm. We are looking at pharmacogenomics with all of the most recent medications that are being used. We are looking at your HLA genes in terms of your autoimmune risk, along with all of the interleukins that have been currently associated with increased risk for COVID-19 infection. We are looking at pretty much everything under the sun that is available, and we update this panel every week. So we are looking at these things. If we are able to get blood work, then we are suggesting it. You know, it is challenging right now. We, of course, understand that, you know, getting a blood draw can be dangerous depending on where you live and what your immune status is. So if you have any questions at all, please put it in the comment boxes for us. And if you need more information, please visit us at nutritionalgenomicsinstitute.com. Please, everybody, stay well. We look forward to seeing you guys next week on Gene Bites. And take care, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye, guys.